The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you once again. And we have what you might call a magical show today. We're going to start out speaking with Diane Ahlquist. She's going to talk to us about, of all things, moon magic and talk about harnessing the mystical energy of the moon. And then in part two, Natalie Zaman will join us to talk about color and conjure, ritual and magic spells to color. And we will be with the program after this little bit of magic.
iPhone and iPad users, help us keep the Paranormal Podcast at the top of the charts. Go into your Apple Podcasts app right now and hit subscribe. We appreciate it. Now on to the show.
Well, next, I think we have an absolutely fascinating discussion because this is something that I've been very interested in, kind of the mystical properties of the moon. Now, we're going to talk about that a little bit, but then we're going to take it a little further. We're going to talk about harnessing that mystical energy of the moon for your benefit. And we have a great guest to do that with. I'm talking about Diane Ahlquist. She is the author of the recent book, Moon Magic, Your Complete Guide to Harnessing the Mystical Energy of the Moon. And she is also a speaker and a third-generation intuitive who's used her gifts in counseling for over 25 years. She's also the author of several other books, including Moon Spells, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Life After Death, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Fortune Telling. And that really works out because I'm a complete idiot. So, no.
No.
The voice you hear is Diane Ahlquist. Diane, welcome to the program today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, Jim.
I'm looking forward to this. I've always been fascinated, and I often use this as a touchstone with my audience. I'm in such an age when I was a little kid, there was a show called In Search Of that came on, and they did a show, and I'll never forget it, about the mystical properties of the moon and how, emergency rooms see more cases in a full moon, and that the thought that the moon has impact to us here on Earth. So while we're going to talk about the advanced piece of it, how to harness that energy, let's maybe first of all talk about the whole idea of why the moon is more than just a heavenly body, that it actually is mystical and it impacts us.
I believe that if you put yourself in sync with the phases of the moon, you're putting yourself in sync with nature, and everything kind of flows better. So what I do and what I suggest to my readers and everyone is that if you recognize all the phases of the moon and know how to work with them and know what they do and what they don't do, which we'll discuss, you actually can make your life a little easier. Things will flow better. It's like you're swimming, with the tide instead of against it. And everybody, of course, like you mentioned, knows about the full moon and they hear about the stories in the ER and so on and so forth. But there's more to it than that. At a full moon, we could start there, perhaps, because that's
Sure.
the most familiar. I don't believe in werewolves, but anyway, at the full moon, there to me is such an intense energy. There's more light, and the scientific part of it would be where they say, well, because there's it draws water towards it. The tides are higher, and people fish according to the phases of the moon sometimes, and that makes sense. But you can also do it to ask your higher power for things. I call it doing sort of like a lunar boost. So if you meditate, or if you're a person who does spells or rituals, and the best of ways, always white everything good, you can harness the full moon to kind of get yourself into a higher state of consciousness where when you ask your higher power or the universal life force energy or whatever your beliefs are, that those things will come into your life quicker. And that's why a lot of people do, full moon rituals, because it's very intense. But in my book, Moon Magic, I also write about some people are moon sensitive. And that's just sort of a phrase that I coined. Maybe other people have used it. I've never heard it, but it kind of gets the point across. And I think that when you're moon sensitive or full moon sensitive, which I would call myself that I am, I don't do meditations or spells or anything like that on the night of a full moon, because I am personally not that clear on full moons. I can tend to be a little scattered. I know one girl whose feet swell every full moon. She can't go and buy shoes. Some people get a little depressed. Some people get a little wild and crazy. So it affects different people different ways. So if I'm doing a meditation according to the phases of the moon, I'll do it at a waxing moon, which is right before a full moon, when it appears like the moon is getting larger and larger in the sky. I'll do it a few days before the full moon. So on the full moon, I'm not affected by it. Other people can tolerate the full moon. I call them full moon tolerant, and they'll sit there and do their spells and their magic work or just meditations, and it will work beautifully for them. But some people are sensitive and some aren't. And what I suggest to my readers in Moon Magic is to make yourself like a little journal and to see how you really feel, and you have to be honest, on the night of a full moon, what happens, what you've done, and then you'll kind of get the hang of whether you're moon sensitive or moon tolerant.
Now, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, you're kind of bringing this to the forefront, first with your book in the early 2000s, Moon Spells, and now with Moon Magic. But the idea that the moon impacts humanity and the earth is not necessarily new. It actually goes back to ancient times, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. It does. Many of our ancestors used the moon to to plan events. They used it for hunting, all sorts of things. So it's not like we've created it. It's been around for a long time. And now some people, I think with technology and we get so busy, sometimes people sort of just get away from nature, and they'll just look at the moon and say, oh, that's pretty, or oh, today it's a little crescent moon, that's pretty. But we kind of forget where we came from and what our ancestors used to do. And just because they were our ancestors doesn't mean that we do it better now than they used to. So there definitely was are big beliefs about using the phases of the moon. People plant by the phases of the moon. You know how many farmers grow, plants that are leafy, for instance, when the moon is waxing, because if it's leafy, it's going to draw up. And people even do surgeries according to the phases of the moon. You're not supposed to, if you want something taken out of your body, for example, let's say you have a little skin cancer or something, and it's nothing serious, and it doesn't require emergency, surgical procedures, you can kind of schedule your surgery according to the phases of the moon. You want to do it when the moon is waning, when it looks like things are getting lesser and lesser, because that's going to come off quicker. You'll heal better. So, and that's what our ancients used to do too. They used to do, grow herbs according to the phases of the moon, and it's a big. There's a lot of folklore. There's a lot of truth in it.
Now, so the question is, to me, is how does this work? Does it have to do with is it merely spiritual? Is there something physiological? The moons affect the tides. Is there something about our bodies physiologically that affects the tides? How does moon magic work from the standpoint of how does the moon impact us?
Okay. The the moon doesn't reflect light. The moon has no light. It's a reflection, from the sun. But the more light that we have, I believe, the more powerful it is. There have been studies about sleep patterns as well, where people don't sleep as well on the night of a full moon, and that's because the light triggers something in the retina, and it makes it harder for us to sleep, so we don't produce as much melatonin. So there are some scientific facts about it, but I come from a more spiritual place, and I think that the light does affect us, and it makes us feel a little more powerful when it's brighter, and let's say maybe a little less powerful when it's not as bright. So if I deal with 4 phases of the moon, there's technically 8, but I deal with 4 phases of the moon. There's a full moon, and then from after the full moon, it starts to wane, where it looks smaller in the sky, and that's where we are right now, as a matter of fact. And then after that, it wanes and wanes until there's a dark moon, or you can't see the moon at all, and then it starts to wax up and becomes a full moon again. That's simplistically putting it. So I feel from a spiritual level and from getting into an altered state of consciousness, and you can create what you want using those phases. So if you wanted to let something go, you can get into a meditative state. You can, sit in front of a, let's say, waning moon, when it's looking like it's, decreasing in size, and you can think about letting go of things. Like, this is a good time for me to let go of a relationship. This is a good time for me to stop smoking. This is a good time to start a diet, because things are getting lesser and lesser, and you're moving them out. So you have to do some visualization techniques, too, in your meditative state, seeing things kind of going away. And I think it's an appeal to our subconscious mind through ritual. And I think that's very, very important. And I have noticed that when I try to, we'll use waning, when I try to get rid of something in my life, whether it's a relationship, I'm married now happily, so I don't want to get rid of that, but there are a lot of people who do, it seems the whole breakup just kind of is easier. So I think that we're in sync with nature, and that we, because of the altered state that we can get into, and because it is an appeal to our subconscious minds, that we can create that. I also talk in my book Moon Magic about even doing vision boards according to the phases of the moon. But scientifically, I live in a fishing town in Florida, and, I've talked to local fishermen, because when I do research, I don't always want to just go to the internet. Anybody can do that. So I go out and I talk to people. I look at old books that I've had from, childhood that I've saved or I bought. And the fishermen, most of them, where I'm from, will say that they do catch more fish by the light of the full moon. But again, scientifically, because the tide is higher, the tides are moving, it can kind of stir up the bottom fish, the little fish, and the big fish come and eat the little fish, and then the fishermen catch the big fish, and they get more fish that way. So that would sort of be, to me, the closest scientific part of it that you can find. As far as people being in hospital emergency rooms, ER, on the night of a full moon, that can be debated. Some people say, well, no, people just have that in their minds. That's not true, because that's what they've always heard. And then other people will say, like me, for instance, people who are moon sensitive, maybe they're not paying attention as much to what they're doing, and they fall off a ladder, or they're not driving properly because they're kind of affected by the full moon. So that can kind of go either way. It's just my belief that the full moon, does affect us. In fact, we're coming up on a super moon with a total eclipse that we haven't had in 150 years at the end of January.
Wow. And this will be aired before that. So folks, look for that. Now, when you talk about harnessing the mystical energy of the moon, I would think it would be important to understand the different types of energy. And you go into that in terms of energy basics and kind of explaining to people different kinds of energy. Could you give us a little bit of preview of that?
Sure. I think that we're most energetic at a full moon. Again, people who are moon sensitive, everybody's still energetic because it's very uplifting. But that isn't the best time to contemplate on things that you want. And as the moon starts to wane, after a full moon gets lesser and lesser in the sky, then our energy drops down a little. We become almost more focused, in my opinion, more serious. That's why, because you're not dealing with so much energy, coming at you. You're a little calmer, and I think that's when you should use that calmness to figure out things that you are trying to get rid of in your life. And when we get to a dark moon where there's no moon at all, some people then can become very, very moody. Maybe they get a little cranky. Maybe they get a little depressed because it kind of negates everything. There's not much energy there. So that's actually a good time to make plans for the future, what you want to do. It's a good time to just kind of contemplate things, make some decisions about maybe business. What am I going to do? Where am I going? Do I want to get into a relationship? It's a good time to just sort of sit and think, but not try to create anything. And then as the moon starts to wax, you use that waxing energy. It's like turning up the volume on a radio. As it starts to wax towards a full moon, it gets louder and louder, and it's like you can almost be heard better than you can when the moon is dark, when there's no moon. So it's almost like if you were praying, and you could pray more intensely under certain phases of the moon, which I do. I call it, meditation or prayer. And as it lessens, prayers aren't heard as much, but it's just sort of a more gentler request.
Now, one thing that surprised me in reviewing the book here is that there's a connection between moon energy and when you practice moon energy and the actual days of the week. How does that work?
That is absolutely true. And that's where it gets just like a little more complicated, but I find it very interesting. And I would use it, I'll use healing just, as an example. So if you were, healing, you can also connect your zodiac signs to that, but that's a different story.
Yeah, that was my next question. But go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, you can kind of commingle them. If you have to sort of put it all together. And since I mentioned healing, I'll just go with that for the moment. But let's say you had a tooth that you wanted to have removed. You don't do this if you need emergency surgery. You just get it no matter what the phase of the moon is.
Please do, everybody.
Tell the surgeon. Yes, you don't tell the surgeon, nope, sorry, let me see when it's a good time for me. But the sign of Taurus, and I'm not an astrologer, and I always make this clear to everybody, I'm not an astrologer. I don't know that much about astrology, but I guess I know maybe enough to make me dangerous. So if you had a tooth that you wanted to have removed, because it's something coming out of your body, you want to set your appointment with your dentist or whatever to have that tooth removed when the moon is waning, appearing again when it gets lesser and lesser in the sky. It looks like it's decreasing. And what you want to do is the mouth and the teeth correspond to the zodiac sign of Taurus. Okay, so Taurus corresponds to the mouth and the teeth, and you do not want to have anything surgically removed from the part of the body that the moon sign is in, if that makes sense. So when the moon is in Taurus, and because it corresponds with the mouth and the teeth, that isn't the time you want to have it taken out. You don't want to have it taken out when it's in Taurus, because there's a strain on that part of the body when the moon is in that sign, and it can tend to irritate it. So, and the signs, the astrological signs last, about 2.5 days or so. So you can definitely plan an appointment by using the days of the week and the astrological signs. And for instance, if you were to take Tuesday, okay, as a day of the week, it's associated with the planet Mars. And the Tuesday, it relates to things that are physical and physical endurance. So you can also correspond your day of the week with your zodiac sign, with the phases of the moon. And I think this is how sometimes astrologers figure out this is the best time for us to do this and to do that. Tuesday, it would be a good time to have surgery. So if you had your tooth removed, you could do it on Tuesday when the moon was waning. And it takes a lot of, if you don't know it off the top of your head, it takes a lot of flipping and flopping back in the book, but after a while you kind of get the hang of it. And, even to this day, I will still look at my own notes, but it's amazing and I talk from experience, I had to have an emergency surgery, which I won't go through, but had to do with my hip. And it probably was the worst time in the world to have the surgery done, and then I had to have something else done, and I did it all according to the phases of the moon, the days of the week, and astrology, and there was like a 200% difference, and it was the same surgery. So I really totally believe in that. And even though people who aren't real, metaphysical or new agey or light new age, now they say, a lot of them will still say, well, I do things according to the days of the week at least. So it's that is a whole interesting, concept. On Wednesday, if you like, arts, it's a good day to paint or to draw. And the book goes on and tells you, day by day what the planet is associated with it and what you should or shouldn't be doing. So that's actually can kind of be a lot of fun, but that's why you have to plan in advance. And everything, as you know, we can't plan in advance, but if you can and you have the opportunity to, just for the heck of it, I think people should try, because it doesn't cost you anything. And even if it didn't work out for you for whatever reasons, there's really no harm done. So I think it's worth a try, because a lot of people are very, very surprised, especially with the health and healing.
Well, it's an interesting concept. The concept is moon magic. The book is Moon Magic, your complete guide to harnessing the mystical energy of the moon. Our guest is Diane Ahlquist, and we'll return right after this on the Paranormal Podcast. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And keep listening, because I want to tell you how you can get your first month for only 99 cents. Now, I know a lot of you got devices this holiday season, and now it's like, well, what are we going to do with them? Well, I have a suggestion. You're listening to this show. You love these kinds of topics, so you should get Gaia, because you can watch Gaia on all of your devices. Apple TV, Roku, your iPhone, your iPad, Chromecast, Android device, Fire TV, your computer. If you're listening, you can watch Gaia. And Gaia means quality. They create, they curate, and they bring you the best Infordian topics on video. And they're always upping their game. They're always adding content, new content. And this week is no exception. For example, some of the most recent episodes you can watch if you have Gaia. Beyond Belief with George Norrie. He's going to talk about Knights Templar Nation with Freddie Silva. Very interesting stuff. Or perhaps you want to check out Cosmic Disclosure with David Wilcock and Emery Smith. Emery Smith is going to talk about clones and programmable life forms. Very interesting stuff. Wisdom Teachings with David Wilcock, Geometry of Jupiter's Transformation. Very in-depth, high quality. I think you'll love Gaia. I know you'll love it. So I want to put my money where my mouth is, or Gaia wants to put their money where their mouth is, and I want to give you a chance to sample some of it. So we've created a page, Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim. Over there, I've handpicked shows on UFOs, haunted places, and Bigfoot, to name a few topics I thought you might like. And you can go watch that right now at Gaia.com/Jim. It doesn't cost you a penny. So go watch that. And I think you'll see the Gaia difference, the Gaia quality. And then once you do that, you'll see a little button that says sign up. Once you've watched some of that programming and see the quality. And if you click on that, you'll have the opportunity to sign up for your first month for only 99 cents. It's a great way to dip a toe in the water. And as I've said before, I'm sure you have that much in your couch cushions. 99 cents. Gaia is great, and you're going to absolutely love it. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia.
Bringing you the strange since 2005, we return to the OG of paranormal podcasting himself, Jim Harold.
We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is Diane Ahlquist. The book is Moon Magic, Your Complete Guide to Harnessing the Mystical Energy of the Moon. Diane, you have a section in here where you talk about meditation. How can meditation enhance moon magic?
I very highly believe in meditation. And meditation is basically getting into an altered state of consciousness. And there are different ways of meditating. Some are more complicated than others, and you have to find the way that works for you. I offer many suggestions. The way I personally like to meditate, I think it's the easiest for most people, and I know everybody's not most people, but in a way they are, aren't they? What I do is I sit in a chair, and I do it very simplistically. I will sit into a chair, and I have comfortable clothes on, and I think it's important before you meditate, you should take a shower, believe it or not. And the reason I think people should take a shower is because when you take a shower, you can visualize before you meditate any negative energy coming off of you. I visualize it going down the drain. Even if you just took a shower, the night before, take another one and visualize everything negative just coming off of your body. And that way you sort of start with a clean palate. And you just sit in a chair, and I keep my feet flat on the floor, and I keep my palms up on my knees, like in a receiving, position. And I visualize a white light coming from the bottom of my toes, slowly making its way through my entire body and to the top of my head. And by the time I do that, and that could take a few minutes. Some people, you could do it really quickly, but it's better if it takes a couple of minutes. You can find yourself that you are in an altered state, of consciousness. Some people concentrate on their breathing. That's the more traditional form, and you listen to your breathing, and that's another way. But the way I'm telling you now is a little different than a lot of people do. And I think it was Albert Einstein had a quote that something like, because I don't have it in front of me, but it's like, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. I think that's the quote. So what he was basically saying is, if you've created a problem, you can't solve it in the same state. You've got to swing yourself into an altered state. And when you're in an altered state, it's sort of like everything becomes, for me, everything becomes clearer, and it's kind of like a blank, and I can concentrate on the things I want to, and I can talk to my higher power, being it, God, universal life force energy, gods or goddesses, whatever anybody thinks. Some people just feel nature is their God. I believe that's a pantheist, it's called. But you can make communication better with things that are beyond the physical. So that's how I put myself into a state of meditation. And then when I'm in that state of meditation, if I wanted to figure out whether I should buy a new house, for example, I will focus on whether asking my higher power, however I want to do it. I offer some, words in the book that people can use verbatim, or they can make up their own. But, I might say to the God of my understanding, give me some kind of information. I'm asking for information as to whether it would be wise for me to buy a new house, or let's say that's something I want to buy. I already know that I want to buy a house. Then I might need the money for the new house. So then I might focus on finances and bring those finances into me, into my life, so that would become available, or bring that new love interest into my life, because I don't want to be alone anymore. And if you wait till maybe the next phase of the same moon you did it in, which would be a waxing moon, you will start to see the benefits of that. That's how I met my husband. I always tell him I conjured him up. So,
well, it's interesting because I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but over my holiday break, I had a really interesting experience. I was I was on an errand to go pick up some pies for Christmas, and I was lucky enough to have that happen on a day of a snowstorm. It was about 20 miles from my house, but I went there. But it actually ended up being great. I wasn't thinking about work per se. I was kind of like thinking about other things. And then I had this eureka moment, this aha moment. There had been a problem that I had not a horrible problem, but what to do with my email newsletter for my work. And I'd been off a couple days and not thinking about work. And suddenly out of the blue, the solution, a perfectly elegant and beautiful solution came to me, one that I think the readers will enjoy. It'll be relatively easy for me. And in fact, by the time people hear this, the newsletter, which has been languishing for the last several months, the first edition will be out. And I'm so excited that I can bring it back in a way that I think people will like, but is not onerous to put out every week. And it's really exciting. And sometimes you get these moments. I don't know if altered state is the right phrase for it when I'm describing, but I was in kind of this snowstorm and thinking about the snow and driving and being safe. And out of the blue, this solution came to me, like my mind was working in the background and I didn't even realize it. And I just wonder where those kind of things come from and how can I have more of them? And I think meditation, for example, might be one of those ways.
Because you did something so right, and you may not even know it. You asked for it, and you let it go, and you forgot about it. And that is the best thing that you can do. When you ask for, maybe you were in a meditative state when you were, a few weeks ago when you're thinking about this newsletter, what am I going to do? And there's got to be some solution. So in essence, you were actually asking for it, and then you forgot about it. You're going and getting the pies and, doing this and thinking, oh, there's snow, it's cold, and so on and so forth. And it came to you. What happens is when people ask for something, they have to really believe the solution will come to you. And I think what happened is you asked, maybe not knowing, and you didn't know what the solution was, but you believed you will come up with the solution, or somebody's going to put the solution in your mind. You just knew it was going to be resolved. And that's what I think happened. It's like when you go to a restaurant and you order a tuna sandwich. You order the tuna sandwich, you're at a restaurant, you maybe been there before, even if you haven't. you assume they're going to bring you your tuna sandwich. You really don't have any doubt that they're not going to. So you don't, 10 minutes later, you don't ask the waitress, or 5 minutes later, by the way, can I have a tuna sandwich? She would say, well, you just ordered it, didn't you? And then you don't wait another 1 minute and say, can I have a tuna sandwich? She'd say, what's wrong with you? You ask once, right? That's
True.
it. You ask once. You ask once, you know your tuna sandwich is going to come, and then after a long period of time, if it doesn't come, well, there's a problem. But generally speaking, you ask once, you believe it's going to come, then you start talking to your friends, or you get on your phone if you're alone, or you do whatever you want. You just know it's going to appear, and then it comes when it comes. And I think this is exactly what happened to you. I think that you actually are what I would call like a real fast meditator. That I think that your mind moves very quickly. And so I think you got yourself into that state. You knew it was going to happen. You asked, you believed, and then you're receiving now, and that thought came to you. It's I think your mind is probably pretty excellent. And I'm not saying that just to make you feel good. Yeah, no, that's what I think. Because that's what happens to people. Because some people say, I try and I do these meditations and I keep asking for a way to pay my student loan off, or I keep asking for, this and that. And it takes them forever. And that's because they're not really believing. But you are believing actually in yourself that you would provide your own conclusion. But I think somebody else said, oh, he's not a bad guy, I'm going to help him out here. And because you've got a job to do. So I think that's what happened to you. So I think you're better at doing this than you are. And some people are really natural at it. That's why when I talk about meditation, I don't do all the deep breathing and all that. And I know so many people do. And I just sit there and picture this white light coming off my body, and boom, I'm in an altered state. So there are different things for different people. You might not even have to go that far. You could maybe just sit there for a couple of minutes in front of your computer, and it works for you. So that's why people have to write things down and they have to experiment. But if you can continue to do this, you can do this all the time, Jim. Obviously, you're very good at it.
Oh, thank you. Well, I do find this. I think that. And it doesn't work 100% of the time, but one thing as we're going into a new year, and this will be out the second week of January, some people do resolutions, which I'm not into, and certainly I want to get fit in things. But a lot of things with my work where I have some confidence, I can put them down, and towards the end of the year, I find more times than not, if I've taken action on those things and I've had confidence, somehow it works out. And sometimes you can't see the path, how something's going to work out. And then like a bolt out of the blue, something like an idea during a snowstorm or something else that you don't expect will happen that will facilitate it. So I do believe, and I think you talk about intention in the book and manifestation and those kind of things. I've never been one who believes that, and believe me, I don't have one in the driveway, but I've said this before, when you talk about things like The Secret and things like that, I don't believe that you can sit here and say, well, I'm going to have a Mercedes. But I think when you put intention and team it up with hard work, I think you can achieve a lot of the things that you want to achieve. If you visualize, you say, this is something I want to do, and you start working towards it, I think the universe kind of aligns for you. I think that does happen in my belief, but I can't state it as eloquently as you can, though.
I think that you're right that you state everything eloquently, but I think that you're right that I don't believe in New Year's resolutions either, because that's almost like saying to the universe, like, well, I only have one crack at changing my life, and that's the first of every year. And other than that, if I don't do it then, I can't do it. Well, you can start, every full moon or every waxing moon, you can start a resolution. You can start a new life. You can do it anytime. You limit yourself when you do New Year's resolutions. And most people don't believe they're going to do it. It only lasts a couple of days. They're on that diet for 3 days. They buy the workout gym for, $2,000. They use it twice, and then it goes under their bed. You can start, asking for things immediately. And you're right. You don't have to necessarily say, I want the Mercedes in front of the house, but you could say, I want a beautiful, beautiful car. And, some people will be real specific. Specific is good, but it doesn't always have to be that way. Sometimes it's good to have a few surprises in life. I used to do a lot of psychic readings, and people would say, well, I'll do a psychic reading for you and we can barter. And I'd say, believe it or not, sometimes I just don't do them. I don't get readings. I kind of like to control life myself a little bit and not know what's expected or not know what's going to come.
I did want to ask you, and there's much more in the book, which you'll have to find out more about by picking it up, but what was the kind of difference between this and your other very successful book, Moon Spells? How do you compare and contrast the two?
Okay, Moon Spells is more complex than Moon Magic. So it's like I wrote the more advanced version of Moon Magic first. But Moon Spells, the word itself, I'm not crazy about the word because you get into all this. People think it's evil or, devil worship or it's something horrible. But really, spells are just another way of saying almost meditations, except you use a lot more things. And Moon Spells is really just a series of different spells, if you will, or meditations that you can do for specific things that you want. And it involves a lot of things like bells and candles and incense and all of this stuff. And it can actually be a lot of fun. And sometimes the more things that you have to gather to do a spell, the more you get, it's an appeal to your subconscious. So the more things can work for you because you figure, I had to work so darn hard to do this spell, and I had to cast a circle, and I had to point to the direction west, and I had to get a green candle, that it kind of pushes you in that direction. So the difference between Moon Spells and Moon Magic, I refer to spells in Moon Magic as meditations, not spells, because you don't have to use the candles and you don't have to cast a circle. I always say everything is safe inside a circle. Moon Spells is sort of more dramatic. I'm not Wiccan, but a lot of people who are Wiccan, they love the book. And, I've never met a Wiccan person I didn't like, but just technically I'm not. But I like to do these little spells. And this book was really written a long time ago from notes that I even had since childhood. So Moon Spells is almost a dictionary or a series of spell after spell for money, for breaking up, or for the love of my life is out there somewhere, but I don't know who you are and I want to meet you now, that kind of thing. Where Moon Magic, I talk about planting herbs. It's more of a lighter book. It's more kind of fun. I talk about
more
planting
accessible,
herbs.
More accessible for the beginner. Yeah,
doing vision boards. I've got recipes in there on how to make a moontini. Yeah, I know. Or a Moony Mary, yes, instead of a Bloody Mary.
This is starting to sound really good. No, I'm just...
Oh yeah. By the time you go through all those recipes, you'll be having a good old time. So it's got all those different things in there. It's not just a book of spells and how to get things, that you want. I talk about not only the phases of the moon, but I talk about sometimes like what is a black moon? Everybody knows that a blue moon, or most people, is the second full moon in 1 month, but a black moon is when there's a second new moon in 1 month. So it gives you some information like that. And then there's parts of it that is almost like a bit of a farmer's almanac in essence. It just tells you, when a good time to cut your hair is, that sort of stuff. Lunar gardening. It's a fun book, and I also talk about how to do tea leaf readings.
Well, hopefully everybody will pick it up and check it out. It is Moon Magic, your complete guide to harnessing the mystical energy of the moon. So the $64,000 question, Diane, is where can people find the book? And, of course, where can they find more information about all of your work?
Well, they can go to, of course, Amazon has the book. All of your bookstores have the book. So almost anywhere books are sold, you can find both of my books, Moon Magic, more recent, and moon spells. And then they can also go to my website, which is dianeahlquist.com or moonmagicbook.com, and they can buy it through there, not me, but there are links that, connect it and so on and so forth. So those would be the best places. And also my website gives you excerpts from the book so you can read a little, about it before you purchase the book.
Well, it looks absolutely fascinating. I hope everybody checks it out. The book is Moon Magic, Your Complete Guide to Harnessing the Mystical Energy of the Moon. Diane, thank you for joining us today.
Jim, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
I hope that you enjoyed that segment on moon magic. Hope you can put it to use for you and going to have the moon do some of the heavy lifting of life. And next, we're going to talk about color and conjure with Natalie Zaman right after this.
Get spooky stories automatically delivered to your email inbox with Jim's Inbox Campfire newsletter. Sign up today at jimharrell.com/newsletter. It's free.
An interesting topic today indeed on the program. Now, we've had people on who have talked about conjuring in the past. Myself, even I have come out with an adult coloring book for my Campfire series, which you got to check out, by the way. But putting the two together, the idea of a coloring book and conjuring, fascinating. And our guest today has done just that. I'm talking about Natalie Zaman. She is the author of the recent book, Color and Conjure, Rituals and Magic Spells to Color. And Natalie is a past guest, and she is also the co-author of the Graven Images Oracle deck from Galdi Press and the young adult novels Sirens and Sirens Back in Fashion and Blonde Ops. Her work has appeared in Fate, Sage Woman, and New Witch magazines, and she writes the feature Wandering Witch for witches and pagans. You can find more information on her at nataliezaman.com or at broomsticks.blogspot.com, a collection of craft stories, ritual, and art for pagan families. And we welcome Natalie Zaman back to the program. Natalie, good to talk to you.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing well and looking forward to our discussion today. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of conjuring, but first, how did you come up with this, it seems to me, rather unique idea of pairing coloring, which is so popular these days amongst adults, and conjuring? How did that come together?
It actually came, I guess this is not the first time that this has happened. And I did another coloring book with Wendy Martin. I guess it came out, I'm trying to think of when it came out. Probably, I'm going to guess 2000, we're 18 now? 2015, let's call it that.
Mm-hmm.
And right around this time, too, it was like February-ish, January, February. And the way that happened was, I've known Wendy for a long time through and the SCBWI, which is Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And I don't always known her as a children's book author. She has several picture books for kids out. And she had asked me, hey, she had done a few coloring books herself. She does a lot of Art Nouveau style, really beautiful work. And she wanted to do an animal mandala book. And she was like, hey, why don't you do this with me? And I'm like, are you kidding? Because I can't draw. I mean, apart from Pictionary, which I am undefeated at this point, at least among my circles. Okay, I can get my point across, but I'm not an artist. I can't draw. And she's like, oh no, I want you to write something to go along with the pictures. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. What do you have in mind? So she wants, coloring is a very meditative process, and I think that's why a lot of people enjoy it. It's very relaxing, and it's very focusing. But she was like, why don't we pair it with some meditations to go with it? So it's like you'd even be even more focused and even more meditative. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. So we brainstormed what animals are the cutest and what animals people really love and whatnot. And we came up, I think, with the top 25, at least what we thought were the top 25. And she drew the pictures, and then I was like, okay, what can I come up with to go with this? And what it ended up with was a few keywords to start with, because you want to keep it simple. A message from that animal, and just a tiny little bit, like a sentence or two about like symbolism and that kind of thing. So for each picture, you've got this meditative aspect as well. That's kind of an add-on to it. And you could just color, of course, if that's what if that's what you want to do. But then you could kind of add this kind of like little added bonus cherry on top thing, right? So while I was working on that, I was like, you know what? Because I had been writing spells and meditations for like Llewellyn's, like the spell a day and their almanacs and whatnot for, I guess, a couple of years at that point. And I was like, this would kind of be an interesting combination, because if coloring is that action, that focus that kind of helps magic to work, I was like, what if we put the two together and made them like a combination where you could like, while you're coloring, you're actually doing the spell or the prayer or whatever it is you want to call it. And that's how it came about. And I jotted down a few ideas, and then I called Wendy and we started talking about it. And then we put together a proposal and sent it out, and here we are.
There you go. Well, I think it's a very interesting idea that you've done here. Now, I want to back up a little bit. And I think we talked about this, and I usually do when I work with someone or have someone on the show who practices witchcraft or conjuring. I like to kind of address the stereotype, and the stereotype being that it's very negative and you're casting a spell on someone to kind of put out bad vibes or maybe get even with them or those kind of things. I think that's a perception because of popular media and books and movies and so forth that's out there. And I like to give people like you an opportunity to address that and maybe clarify. So I'm doing that. What would you say to people that have that kind of misconception of conjuring and magic in general?
I think it's again, I think you're absolutely right. It's a lot is chalked up to the media, and I think it always has been. There's always been some sort of propaganda to just kind of sway people to look at folks who, by the way, in the past were looked upon as, the elders of a community, people who other folks would turn to for healing and other necessities and whatnot, and then just kind of turn it around. It's all about, at the end of the day, and I know this is very naive and simplistic, but it's all about like, who's holding the reins. That's I think that's what it's all about. But it's true. I mean, like, and you can't, like, I guess, like, if taking it out of context, anybody from any walk of life, if somebody does something wrong to you, who doesn't, like, even for half a second be like, I'm going to get my own back,
right.
or something like that.
Right.
And that goes for, like I said, any path, any walk of life or whatever. Unfortunately, thanks to movies and stuff like that, it's like, oh, well, people who do magic or whatever, that's what they're up to. It's always something bad, and it's absolutely not. To me, magic is just, and I think I've said this before, magic, prayer, spells, prayer, it's the same thing. It's just more often than not with props, and those props are just used to help you focus your intention and focus your energy. So, and there's all different types of magical practitioners. There are folks that practice witchcraft. There are folks that practice conjuring, which is kind of it's a completely different kind of mode of doing things. And there's just a great variety out there. I think people just need to be more informed. And if they actually sat down with folks, and I really believe that once that happens, on a one-to-one basis, because it's hard to make like these blanket statements, you know what I mean?
Right.
I think when people sit down one-to-one with folks, it's like, hey, oh, wait a minute, this is not what I thought it was. You're not, you're not, boiling toads and, doing all sorts of awful things and whatnot. It's just, people boil, isn't frog legs a delicacy? So, I mean, there are folks that boil toads.
Yeah, they could be a delicious,
it could be a very delicious thing.
But I'm looking through the book here, and it's very, what I'm seeing are very kind of positive things that you're trying to do here. For example, chill out. Find my focus. I mean, this time of year, as we're going into a new year, as we record this, not exactly sure when it's airing yet, but we're all looking. Some people have resolutions. I personally don't do resolutions, but I do goals, and I periodically ask myself throughout the year. I refer back to that and say, am I furthering my goals? This is a lot of things that we already do. We just may not think of them in terms of magic. Isn't that true?
I think so. I mean, to me, it's like I said before, it's just another name for it. The way I look at this book, or actually you pick up any spell book. Okay. If you go to, your local bookstore, or your local New Age store, or whatever, and you pick up a book of spells, it's all about empowerment. And that's what I'm hoping that this does. It puts the power back into, and when I mean power, it's not like, the He-Man, I have the power, and we're going to strike down Skeletor, or that kind of thing. It's more about, having your own confidence to go through your day-to-day life, and deal with the day-to-day stuff, because that's what most of us are doing anyway. It is mostly day-to-day. And that's why when I look at this book, it's not just a coloring book. It's like a toolbox. That's what I hope people end up seeing it as, because I really want folks to rip it apart, and actually do the things. I mean, of course, you could just color, but there's all sorts of little exercises where you're actually burning things and burying things and whatnot, and having that action in there, I think just helps make things happen,
Now, how did you decide, you and your artist, Wendy, how did you decide what to include? Because, boy, it would seem like there'd be a million choices, and obviously sounds like to me something that could certainly lend itself to a volume 2 and a volume 3 and so forth. But what were the criteria? Which things did you want to include?
Well, we figured, what are the things that people kind of, look for the most? That's just like, again, in your everyday day-to-day life. And we put it into categories. And if you look in, like I said, in any kind of spell book or even prayer book or whatever, it's like, well, and it's the same thing. It's like, what's going to help me focus my energy so that I can accomplish this thing, whatever it is. And we came up with, of course, money, because who doesn't want more of that? Family, peace in the family, love, and we're talking not just romantic love, but friendships and, and familial love as well, protection, health, creativity. I'm just going through the different sections in the book. And we also added a couple of things in there that were particularly, quote, magical, like working with moon phases and, the wheel of the year, excuse me, maybe even a little bit of divination and working with the chakras. So those, I think, are like a little bit more outside like the usual. And then it just became a question of, okay, there's only so much real estate in this. What would be what did we think would be the most wanted? And then, of course, in the editorial process, we got suggestions as well. So it wasn't, from our editors over at Llewellyn, so some things were like with any book, some things you get to keep, some things you take away. And at the end of the day, I thought it made it better.
Does the coloring piece make this a little more accessible, maybe for somebody who's new to this?
I think so. Because, we tried to incorporate images that were, because Wendy and I worked closely on this, going back and forth, like drafting the spells, and then I would send it to her and it'd be like, okay, let's tweak this and that, and then go through the imagery. So we wanted to make something that was a little bit accessible, to everyone, so that you're going to see some really familiar images in there and maybe some different ones as well. And I think it also makes it, I hate to use the word intimidating, but also when people hear the word magic, sometimes they're intimidated by it. It's like, oh, because it's kind of an unknown. And it's a little bit mysterious and a little bit, forbidden, maybe even. But when you look at the pictures, it's like, oh, wait a minute, I've done this before. I've done this before. Mm-hmm. I just flipped open to to one of the coloring pages, and it's the Best Friends for Life one. And basically, it's a picture of two hands, and it has those wonderful little friendship bracelets. I know when I was a teenager, I would make them out of like embroidery floss or yarn, and it's just like a series of knots, and you'd trade them with your friends, and you'd all have like certain patterns and whatnot. And the thing is, that's a spell, if you think about it, especially if you're making it, and if you're making it for someone, because you're doing knots, and knots is a process. And as you're tying the knots with the various different colors, and colors have their own connotations, whether it's, think of a family tartan or a crest, and the different color associations we associate, that we make with different feelings. And you're making these knots, and you're putting intention into that, and then you give it to someone. It's like, okay, here, we're best friends for life. We're friends. That kind of strengthens it.
You're putting your energy into it. Your energy.
Yes, absolutely. Same with like if someone's cooking a meal. It's funny because my husband was saying like one day when he came home from work and I was like making dinner and whatnot. And I guess I must have had quite an expression on my face. And he's like, "Yes, you're stirring all your bitterness into that pudding." And I'm like, "Oh no, no, pudding is never bitter. It's always good and sweet and fun." So,
that's funny. That's funny. Yeah. What's one of your favorites in the book?
I have a particular fondness for the St. Joseph Sell This House spell, partly because I'm looking at downsizing. So maybe I'm hoping, okay, this guy's, I'm going to put this guy to work for me. But also I was raised Catholic. So I have a very, very big, large, soft spot for all things Catholic. And by the way, I found, this is just a little aside, I found this wonderful place thanks to Facebook. There's a warehouse. I think it's in like the Western Pennsylvania area. I got to look it up. But it's a warehouse of all like pre-Vatican II like statuary and stuff like that. Huh. So it's really like super old school. I'm like, I must go there with a truck. Because I want a big old statue of somebody. I'm not sure who, but I'm gonna make it out there. That's one of my 2018 goals, anyway. But anyhow, this coloring page is kind of reminiscent of these little kits that you can find in novelty stores, where it's like, okay, you use it to sell this house, and usually with the kit, a little statue of St. Joseph, and you have to bury him upside down in your yard facing out because he can help you sell the house. And then after the house has been sold, then you can, you make a little offering to him and whatnot. And this isn't like a kit you can buy, but you color it and you can make it yourself. So
interesting.
That's one of my favorites.
Now, I'm almost fascinated by the creative process. Now, when I did my coloring book, and to be clear, I am not an artist. In fact, it sounds like your artistic skills, Natalie, are better than mine because you're good at Pictionary. I'm horrible at Pictionary. I can barely get out of Stickman. And universally, when we play, the reaction to my pictures are laughter because really, literally, I draw like about a 40-year-old, and I'm not I am not exaggerating. I was not born with that gene. So I worked with an artist by the name of Len Peralta on the Campfire book, who is fantastic and put into place things that I could think of, but couldn't even dream to begin to draw. What was the creative process between you and Wendy because I'm always interested in how that works.
Yeah, this is very interesting for me too, because this is the two coloring books were the first time I ever really worked closely with an illustrator, because all of my previous work has been novels. But when I first started writing, I was interested in doing picture books. And of course I couldn't draw, but I was very gratified to learn that when you're a picture book writer, if your manuscript sells, you're assigned an illustrator. Like your editor will unless you're an illustrator author yourself, that's kind of selected for you. And the story is already written, and then the way that works is the story is written, and then you might have conversations with the artist, but then the artist brings their own flavor to said story and their own style to the story as well. And I never really had the privilege of doing that yet. And so this was a very, very collaborative effort in many ways. The way that it started, like I said, was I had this idea to combine the spells with the pictures, and then Wendy and I went back and forth. As a matter of fact, the first one that came to mind was abracadabra, because the word itself is an ancient word. There's many, many different interpretations of it, but the one that I settled on was the I create. But I also have this very big attachment to the word as a stage magician's word. So I was just like, okay, I love this word, and I know like sometimes like you'll see it in like a pyramid form so that you have the repeating letters and everything, but I was like, I really want like a top hat and a rabbit. I was like, I just kind of see that. And what Wendy ended up doing was, and it's super cool, she kind of did she got that repetitiveness in of that like A, B, R, in that pyramid form, but she did it with like these magic wands in the background. So you get like kind of a hint of the ancientness of the word. But you have the stage magician, and then there's a little place where you can write out what you want to do. And it's magic wands and doves that she put in the background. And it's really kind of an incredible combining of the two things. And like I said, the way that they had us doing it over at Llewellyn was I ended up drafting the spells first, but I would draft like a few at a time, then send them over to her, and she would be like, okay, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, and what about this? And then the spells would be tweaked, and then we'd talk about the illustration. And 9 times out of 10, she already saw what was in, like at least what my contribution, what was in my head, and brought it to life, which was really cool. And then we just went back and forth that way. And then, of course, you also get the editorial from, your editors and art directors and that kind of thing. And then it tweaked it even more. There's no replacement for a good editor, really. They're of such value in the publishing world. They really kind of shape and hone and polish a book so that it really, really shines. Love working with people like that. It's awesome.
Now, in the book, you talk about the idea of color magic and how it compares to mathematics. I thought that was interesting. Can you talk about that concept a little bit?
Okay, you're talking about like the additions of color to each other, like when you put like red plus blue together.
Yes.
And then you make it, and it makes purple. That actually was a discussion I had, and the person that put that idea into my head is my very good friend Amy Blackthorne, who does a whole host of different things. And she actually has a book coming out, I believe, in the fall of this year. It's an herbal reference, and it's fantastic. But when we were talking about color magic, she was like, yeah, no, if you look at it in terms of like, the adding of the colors is also the adding of energy. And when you put more of something into it, so it's like if you have red and red is passion, let's say, and that's only one association of red. There's all sorts of different associations you could go with red. But then you add white to it, and white is purity. So you're making it pink, and that makes it a different kind of passion. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at color. And then you can add, let's see, you have red passion and blue peace, which makes purple, which is kind of a connection to a higher power, which is also, really, really interesting. Peace and yellow joy would be green, which is healing. It just goes to show you how interconnected everything is and whatnot. And I never called myself a math person before. I really need to, Well, it's true. I've always sold myself short with math, but you know what? I'm finding that it's just like, it's just a matter of like having things explained to you in the right way, or having it, or encountering a thing in the right way. And all of a sudden, it makes sense.
Well, it's interesting. If you look at things like the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence and so forth, there's actually kind of some metaphysical properties of mathematics that are really interesting and probably far beyond my ability to comprehend, but it all makes you think how it all ties together, how the universe all ties together.
Yours and mine both, darling.
So, I mean, what's the reception been on this book?
So far, people really seem to like it. I mean, it's been called like kind of deceptively simple, which I kind of really like, because it is. I mean, like, you know, there's so many complexities to magic and prayer and spirituality, but I think sometimes we make it a little more complicated than it needs to be, you know. And if this, like I said, if this is a tool that empowers people, I've heard of people using the book in doing group work, which is awesome. You know, I'm waiting. I really want to see, like I said, some folks really like totally destroying this thing. And what I mean by that is like taking the pages out and ripping them out and using them and burying them and burning them and making things with them and whatnot. So, but then again, that kind of work is very personal. So I don't know if, you know, I'm ever really going to be able to, you know, witness that. Because it's like I said, like when one prays and one has commune with the divine, whatever you perceive it to be, that's between you and, you know, and that divinity. Sometimes things aren't meant to be shared. So, but so far, like I said, it seems like it's doing well. I'll look on Amazon every now and then and be like, "Oh, look at that! That's such a nice low number. That's awesome."
There you go.
You know,
well,
but it's not all about sales. So
the question is, where can people find the book? And I guess even more importantly, where can people find all information about Natalie Zaman?
Ooh, okay. So the book you could get at pretty much any bookstore. I mean, you got the big box ones, and of course Amazon. My favorite, of course, is to go into your local bookstore or New Age store and ask for it. And if they don't have it, they can order it and get it relatively quickly for you. And you'd be supporting small businesses, which is, you know, what it's all about. You know, small businesses make for communities and make for downtowns and all of the wonderful things that we love about America and whatnot. So yes, please support local small businesses and go into those stores and ask for this or any book that you're looking for. And anyone can find me and all of the things that I do at my website, which is my first and last name together, nataliezaman.com. Also, nataliezaman.blogspot.com, but both things will get you there. All roads lead to me, so there you have it.
Well, we're glad that your road today led to us and to spend some time with us on the Paranormal Podcast. Natalie Zaman, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much.
Hope you liked it. Know that I did. I love bringing us some different kind of things. I love to throw you a curveball from time to time, so maybe not quite what you're expecting. And then we also have a heaping helping of things like ghosts and UFOs and cryptids and all of that as well. So we always like to have a nice paranormal buffet laid out for you to choose from. We thank you so much for listening to the Paranormal Podcast, and we'll talk to you next time. Until then, stay spooky. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and JimHarold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to JimHarold.com, and thanks for listening.